What do you know about a weapon like a seismic bomb? Surely you're hearing about it for the first time, just like the Kugo death ray. Throughout history, people have learned to kill each other in the most sophisticated ways. Instead of living in peace and making progress, humanity spends enormous resources inventing weapons capable of causing destruction, wiping cities off the face of the earth, and destroying entire continents. Hardly anything can compare to nuclear weapons in terms of deadliness, but they are used extremely rarely and serve more as a deterrent. The overwhelming majority of wars are fought with conventional weapons. It was during the years of World War II that the extraordinary fantasies of design engineers were brought to life, and their strange projects were taken seriously. Money was not counted back then, and the warring state was ready to put everything on the altar of victory. Secret developments, which resembled chapters from science fiction stories, were not exclusive to Germany. The British, Americans, and Japanese had them as well. Of course, the Soviet Union also prepared a couple of surprises for the enemy. The tests did not always go successfully, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Weapons historians say that some developers of the 1940s were not in their right mind, and some projects were simply unfeasible because they ignored the laws of physics. Since then, the world has become more pragmatic and calculating. Many types of weapons from the past are banned by international conventions and will forever become history, remaining only in the archives of special services. Modern means of killing each other have not become less effective, but they have definitely become more trivial. Today, we will talk about the most unusual weapons of World War II. Most likely, you will see inventions like the shovel mortar, exploding rats, and the ampulomet for the first time. We will also talk about what the Third Reich was developing in its secret laboratories, so be sure to watch this video until the end. Let's begin. After the capitulation of France, Great Britain began equipping its agents with experimental weapons. Almost all research at that time was related to disguising bombs as various objects. And while the idea of hiding an explosive device in a suitcase or even in soap might be something an ordinary person could accept, placing mechanisms inside a rat seems completely abnormal. British scientific agencies and secret military laboratories were seriously engaged in stuffing the bodies of dead rats with plastic explosives. At first, there were several objectives, but then the British Special Operations Executive decided to scatter the rats near German boiler rooms. The logic was as follows. A guard sees a dead rat and, wanting to get rid of the body, throws it into the boiler furnace. The important facility is damaged by the explosion. Experts say that the operation by the British Special Services failed. The Germans managed to intercept the container with the rats and discovered the explosive devices. Probably, those who examined the bodies of the discovered animals were very surprised by their contents. But, one way or another, the suspicious German counterintelligence officers launched a real hunt for rodents and were forced to waste their efforts in this direction for nothing. Thanks to the English, at least for the fact that the rats were dead, and the scientists did not dare to experiment with live animals. The Americans went further. Their biologists and engineers developed incendiary bats. Doesn't sound very humane, does it? The United States military wanted to create a bomb in which about 1,000 compartments served as living quarters, or Mexican bats equipped with small incendiary charges. Bats are capable of carrying loads that significantly exceed their own weight, and while in hibernation, they don't require food or care. Another important feature is that they fly at night and sleep during the day. The developers considered these characteristics ideal. Japanese cities were supposed to suffer from the invasion of killer bats. The containers were planned to be dropped at dawn from an altitude of 1,500 meters. At the designated altitude, a special parachute would open, the bomb would slow down, and doors inside it would open, after which the bats would fly out into the wild. The terrifying idea was that, according to the Americans' plan, the bats were supposed to start looking for shelter in the roofs of houses within a radius of 30 to 60 kilometers. At the right moment, the timers would go off and the charges would ignite, causing an avalanche of fires in hundreds of places at once. Japanese houses at that time were often built from wood and other flammable materials, and under favorable circumstances, a single bomb could burn down an entire city. The density of buildings in Japan's largest cities only contributed to this. After a series of successful tests, the project was shut down. But you shouldn't thank the Americans for consciously abandoning the project because of its madness. It's just that the United States put all its efforts into creating the atomic bomb. Let's move on to the developments of Japanese engineers, who in response dreamed of pleasing the Americans with their own packages. The weapon, which its creators called Fusen Bakudan, which translates as fire balloon, was a hydrogen-filled aerostat. You can't deny the ingenuity of Asian craftsmen. Bombs, ballast, and special equipment were attached to the balloon. A special stabilization system allowed the Fusen Bakudan, carried by air currents, to stay at a set altitude at all times. The Japanese had a grudge against the United States, and American cities were chosen as the target. After 3 days of flight, the balloon would be over the territory of the United States of America, and at a certain moment, the bombs were supposed to automatically drop down. The first deadly package from the Asians was sent to the States in November. Overall, the land of the rising sun made every effort to deliver over 9,000 incendiary bombs to the enemy, with many balloons successfully reaching their targets. Fragments of balloons and pieces of equipment were found in various parts of America at that time. If the creators had succeeded in developing the device and properly testing it, a disaster in the United States would have been inevitable. And yet, it was decided to abandon the idea. Military historians say that the American Censorship Committee issued an order in balloons. In the press, Japanese experts apparently decided that Fusen Bakudan were not very effective, and their project failed. However, the American atomic bombs, which turned 2 Japanese cities into ruins, were no less an important factor in the shutdown of the state's unique military development programs. They also contributed to its quick exit from the war. To conclude the topic of using animals during the war, it is worth mentioning that in the Soviet Union, they began training demolition dogs as early as 1924. But it was during the Second World War that 4-legged sappers were truly widely used. As a rule, these animals were used against tanks, which is why they were directly called anti-tank dogs. By modern standards, such experiments can hardly be considered humane. But the truth is that Nazi Germany had to be stopped at any cost, and dogs still made their contribution to the victory over fascism. They were trained to pull out the detonator with their teeth when they were under a tank. They say that it was often almost impossible to make a dog do this in combat conditions, so the command used a much simpler strategy: to simply blow up the dog. It's terrifying to imagine what the dog handlers felt when they sent their beloved animals on a mission from which they would never return. After all, there's nothing worse than war. There is information that at a certain point, the dogs became so effective that the terrified Germans started shooting at every dog they saw. There are no exact statistics on their use, but according to some sources, they destroyed at least 300 German tanks. In local battles, their involvement gave a significant advantage. Historians of the Great Patriotic War note that during missions, the dogs were often distracted and frequently returned to their trainers. Of course, this did not bode well. Let's move on to the iron monsters. Goliath, also known as a self-propelled mine, was a remotely controlled carrier of explosives for demolishing buildings and blowing up regular tanks. The Germans introduced it in 1942 using an unusual design to transport a 165-pound bomb to its target. Tanks, infantry units, bridges, and buildings were destined to suffer from the Goliaths. In the archival photograph, you can see these devices captured by British soldiers. Contrary to its name, the tank was only half a meter tall and 1.5 meters long. It's amazing that in the 1940s, the technology for wired control of complex devices was already successfully working with an operator. The mini-tank was connected by a 650-meter-long cable. It was found through experience that the most vulnerable part was the cable, which could be cut. So soon mini-tanks controlled by radio signal were created. It's something like a remote-controlled car. Only this toy can destroy an area of several dozen square meters. More than 4,600 of these devices were produced, including a larger version capable of carrying a 220-pound bomb. In practice, the Goliaths proved to be slow and clumsy, and their payload was insufficient. Still, the idea was far ahead of its time, and in the 40s, robotics was far from modern capabilities. But the stubborn Germans believed in the success of the concept until the very end. Some experts point to the high cost of the device as the main reason why it had to be abandoned soon after. To make the Goliath cheaper, the designers replaced the electric engine with a gasoline one. But this significantly reduced the combat effectiveness of the machine. It became much louder and more noticeable. Prominent military experts even called these mini-tanks the most unsuccessful weapon of the Wehrmacht. That's a controversial statement, since Germany managed to mass-produce unsuccessful designs by the dozen, and it's hard to give the title of worst weapon to any particular device. Some examples are still kept in the collections of millionaires and ordinary people to this day, and some of them are in excellent condition and still operational. Since the 19th century, countries have been developing weapons that allow shooting from behind cover. The simplest and most logical solution to this problem was to produce models with a curved barrel. For a long time, the prototypes failed tests outright, and the first successful attempts to implement these ideas only happened in the 20th century. And while in the West the idea was implemented using special attachments, in the Soviet Union in the 1940s, they tried to create curved barrel weapons by modifying the design of the barrels of Goryunov and Kalashnikov machine guns. A little later, many other types of firearms were also subjected to experiments with bending. It was planned that the curved barrel weapons would prove themselves on fortified lines with pillboxes, but the project was deemed unsuccessful. It seems that the Third Reich was also working on similar developments, and in this specific arms race, the Germans were more successful, and in 1943, devices of this type were officially supplied to the troops, and even managed to see some action in battles in certain places. The ampulomet is surrounded by myths. Some claim that the device was invented by the residents of besieged Leningrad, who were so weakened by terrible hunger that they couldn't throw bottles with incendiary mixture at German vehicles. But the legend is only partly true. The ampulomet was indeed used and even produced in besieged Leningrad, but it was developed at the Moscow Design Bureau of Plant Number 145, named after Kirov. The device was intended to be something in between an infantry flamethrower and one mounted on a fixed machine. Essentially, the ampulomet was a small mortar that fired glass or thin-walled metal ampules filled with a self-igniting incendiary mixture. Despite its impressive 125 mm caliber, it could only be used effectively in certain situations and at close range. Here's what weapons historian and Russian Academy of Sciences employee Viktor Sanfarov had to say about this device. It's hard to say how effective it was. Time. In addition to capsules with poisonous substances, the ampulomet crew also had AJ, two-type ammunition at their disposal, in which a capsule with incendiary mixture was combined with a miniature detonator. It's a primitive weapon, but the approach is surprisingly creative. Coming up with that isn't easy. Despite the revolutionary nature of the invention, the ampulomet was extremely unreliable. There are documented incidents where the capsules with incendiary mixture exploded in the barrel, which killed the crew using the device. By the way, don't pay attention. Standard military equipment is still available today. Just look at the unmanned aerial vehicles alone. For example, tiny UAVs that weigh only 33 grams, and because of their extremely small size, they are almost impossible to detect. If you're interested in us making a separate video about unusual modern weapons, for example, about robots and drones used by superpowers, let us know in the comments. The shovel mortar. At first glance, it might seem like some kind of design mistake, but no. The weapon was approved by Soviet Research Institute No. 13 of the People's Commissariat of Armaments, and enormous resources were devoted to its creation. The device is truly unconventional, but not only was it adopted into service, it also successfully fulfilled its tasks. The hybrid of a small infantry shovel and a mortar had a caliber of 37 tietris. When the weapon was used as a mortar, the shovel served as a base plate. But still, the history of the shovel mortar was not very long. During the war years, the device lost its relevance, as other types of equipment surpassed it in range and shell power, so the invention was soon withdrawn from service. And some experts literally tore the creation of Soviet engineers to shreds, describing it as follows: a bad shovel, a useless mortar. The seismic bomb was intended to inflict catastrophic damage on enemy targets. The Englishman Barnes Wallis came up with the concept for this bomb when he noticed that a huge portion of the energy from conventional explosions was wasted, dissipating into the air. This unfortunate flaw was supposed to be fixed by a munition that looked like a huge aerial bomb with an ultra-hard pointed tip. After being dropped from a bomber aircraft, the projectile was supposed to penetrate deep into the ground and then detonate, causing incredibly powerful tremors in the earth. Wallace and his team designed several types of projectiles, which were later used against industrial facilities and military targets. For example, it was with their help that the famous V-2 rocket factory was put out of commission, the battleship Tirpitz was sent to the bottom to feed the crabs, and other targets previously considered invulnerable were destroyed. The Americans, having seen the successes of the British, tried to create a bomb that could cause a tsunami. By the way, experts say that technically this idea is quite feasible, but thank God it was never put into practice. One of the most ambitious concepts of Japanese engineers was the Kugo ray, designed to shoot down airplanes at distances of hundreds of kilometers. At the very end of World War II, the Americans got hold of documents indicating that secret developments under this project began in 1939. While on paper this weapon looked futuristic and formidable, in practice the Japanese only managed to kill a few rabbits. The death ray, as the developers themselves called it, could kill small animals at a distance of 30 meters in 10 minutes. Kugo was never able to handle more serious targets. By the way, the Germans also tried to create something similar, but they didn't succeed either. The Fukuryu suicide divers were part of the Special Forces units of the Japanese Army. 6,000 men were trained to expertly use diving equipment and handle 5-meter bamboo poles with 15 kilograms of explosives attached to the end. Yes, those were harsh times. The lead weights on the divers' suits allowed them to stay confidently on the bottom without the risk of surfacing at the wrong moment. When they spotted an enemy ship, Fukuryu were supposed to approach and jab it with the pole. Naturally, they had almost no chance of surviving the explosion. By the way, there were no reports of these suicide divers actually being used in combat, except, perhaps, for one case when it was claimed that a United States Navy landing ship and its support vessel were attacked by kamikaze swimmers. The Germans created a supergun, popularly known as a weapon of vengeance. It was built right on a hill and was capable of firing artillery shells across the English Channel, delivering shells directly to London. A second one was built further east, but during testing, the gun showed results that were half of what was expected. So, during firing in May 1944, the shell reached a range of 88 kilometers, and tests in July of the same year improved the result to 93 kilometers. Construction continued despite ongoing British Air Force raids. One of these devices even took part in combat operations, but its effectiveness was low, so further production of the gun was abandoned. However, in 1945, Nazi Germany had much more serious problems. By the way, one of these superguns was destroyed by a British pilot who managed to drop a bomb right into the main bunker. All the personnel died at that time, and it was impossible to restore the gun complex. So in the end, not a single shell from this weapon ever reached London. It's amazing how sophisticated the minds of German scientists and engineers were in inventing new ways to destroy and enslave humanity. If some of their developments had succeeded, history would have taken a completely different direction. In the summer of 1942, secret projects for the newest super-heavy tanks of two types were brought to Hitler. These were real monsters weighing 1,000 and 1,500 tons. For comparison, a regular Tiger tank weighed only 60 tons, was over 42 meters long, and had a crew of more than 100 people. The shells were so heavy that they were supposed to be delivered by special trucks, but the idea was never truly realized. Many unusual German military developments happened in the 1930s, so we left them out of this video. This video focuses on weapons made during World War II. Write in the comments if you want us to make a video about the secret superweapons of the Third Reich. In the pre-war era, Nazi Germany dreamed of world domination. The desire to create a weapon capable of destroying targets in the most inaccessible areas led the Germans to work on a unique project called the Silverbird. The project involved creating a hypersonic suborbital bomber spacecraft. The author was Eugen Zenger. The Germans were driven by the dream of reaching the United States with bombers. The second target was the distant industrial regions of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in the Urals and Siberia, which other missiles at that time could not reach. Development of the Silverbird began even before the start of the Great Patriotic War, but the design work was temporarily frozen in 1941 since the project did not promise immediate results. The weight of the bomb load depended on the flight distance. For example, to reach New York, the bird was supposed to carry 6 tons of bombs. 3 years later, they tried to revive the project, but there were no longer enough resources to continue development. Like many other ambitious ideas of Germany in the 1940s, this project remained only as drawings on paper. Modern engineers claim that in the form the plane was being designed, it simply could not have existed. According to calculations, the plane would have fallen apart upon re-entering the atmosphere. In this video, we presented many ideas from developers and weapons from the World War II era. We were especially intrigued by the story of the creation of detonating rats. Even though there was nothing large-scale about this project, common sense refuses to believe that scientists actually went ahead with such an astonishing solution. Write in the comments which of the inventions seemed the most unusual to you. Thanks for watching, rating this episode, and see you in future episodes on our channel.